Now I have the pleasure to introduce artist and sculptor Janet Eckelman. Janet describes the world as her creative canvas. Bold, beautiful, and big, literally. You'll see what I mean tonight on The Bash. Please join me in welcoming Janet Eckelman.
You're looking at a picture of where I grew up. I felt a profound sense of isolation. I was either in my air-conditioned car or in an air-conditioned building, and there was no sense of a public realm in between. Off I went to college. I was a little bit of a slow reader, and I knew that I had to have at least one class that didn't have a lot of reading. So that's how I ended up in my first art class. It was drawing class. And don't worry, I got a B-. I'm not very good at drawing, in fact. So I painted for about a decade when I applied to go on a Fulbright to India. And I arrived, and I promised to give exhibitions for the embassy, and they rented these gallery spaces around the country. And I had shipped all of my paints to make the work for these shows. And I'm waiting for the paints to arrive. I'm waiting. You can guess what happened. The deadline arrived, and my paints didn't. I didn't know what to do. It was the most horrible situation I think I had ever faced, feeling like I had to deliver, and I had nothing to make art with. And so I looked, and this was a place famous for sculpture. In fact, bronze for, the Chola bronzes for 1,000 years. So I thought, okay, I'm going to learn to make bronze. I started learning to cast with the lost wax method. And it's now 10 weeks till the show, and I've got a dozen little bronzes the size of my hand. And I'm just completely perplexed. I didn't know what to do. But every day after I'd work in the foundry, I'd walk the 1 block to the beach, and I'd get some exercise. I'd take a walk and go for a swim. And it was also the end of the workday for the fishermen who were reeling in their nets into these mounds on the sand. And at that moment, I was calculating in my head, like, if I want to make my bronzes big, how much is this going to cost? And I didn't even have enough money for the raw materials. And I looked at the nets, and I'd seen them every day, and I thought, whoa, that's another way to make volumetric form without heavy, solid material. And I began working with these fishermen. This was my first satisfying sculpture. I think of it as a self-portrait. The title is Wide Hips. I pulled them up onto poles on the beach to take photographs for the exhibition catalog, and what I discovered was that the wind became a kind of choreography, and they were always moving and changing, and it completely mesmerized me. And it's important to note, I didn't set out to be a sculptor of wind. I was just engaged with my materials and making, and I stumbled upon it. I was invited to the Museum of the Center of Europe, and I met an old lady who made lace doilies, and it was the same knot the Indian fishermen had taught me, but they had these beautiful patterns. And I liked this fine craftsmanship it gave my work when you were close to it, but I was still longing to stop being an object you look at and become something you could get lost in. So I returned to India to make my first large piece of 1.5 million hand-tied knots with this family of fishermen. And we brought it in this duffel bag to Madrid, Spain, for a large art fair. I think they had 100,000 people within that week in Madrid, and one of them was the architect and urbanist designing the waterfront for Porto, Portugal. And he asked if I could create this as a permanent work for the city. Well, I didn't know how to take something ephemeral and delicate and turn it into something robust and engineered that could survive hurricanes. I had to find a material that could survive ultraviolet rays, pollution, and salt air, yet remain soft and fluidly moving in a hurricane. I found PTFE And then I had to solve the problem of proving to them that this could withstand 90-mile-per-hour winds. And I went searching. It turns out there's no engineering software for things that are porous and moving. But I found a guy who was an engineer for America's Cup racing yacht sails. And he helped me solve the twin challenges of precise shape with gentle movement. Then we had to find a way to pull the nuts tight enough to really survive these winds. And I went from factory to factory until I found one that was willing to explain how the machines worked and which variables could be adjusted. And we figured out how to make lace with an industrial machine like this. By adjusting with each knot, we just changed the length of the side of each diamond. And then we had to find a way to document this like a language to communicate this to an industrial worker how to make this ancient craft. So after 3 years and the birth of both of my children, we raised this 40,000 square foot piece of lace into the air. And what was most exciting to me was that it had lost nothing in translation. When I walked under it for the first time, I realized it was that feeling I had been searching for, of being sheltered and yet connected to infinite sky. And really, I think my life was never going to be the same at that moment. I realized that. This is my favorite photo. What you can't see is there's a 3-lane highway there, and there's no crosswalk. So everyone has gotten under there by darting through traffic. This is how I learn about the way my works live, by seeing how people are sharing them in social media. And I got a call from a friend recently that Google Earth, when you pull out in Europe where there's only one icon per country, that the sculpture had somehow become the icon for the country. It's so exciting for me when it takes a life of its own in people's lives. That's why I make it and do it, really. So I'm going to share some different design challenges that I'm facing. This is downtown Philadelphia, their beloved historic city hall where the original waterworks was. And I didn't want to use netting, and I was searching for a way to use water. These are atomized water particles that are so tiny that you can walk through in a full business suit without getting wet. And my idea was I wanted to trace the paths of the subway trains that are beneath ground, and so you can see them above ground, as if it were an X-ray of the city's circulatory system. And I wanted to give you something, if you pay attention, you learn something you wouldn't have known, like there's more traffic east-west at certain hours than north-south, and in fact, you've just missed your train. Downtown Phoenix told me they dreamed of having a civic space that would pull people together outside to spend time in their climate. I said, well, what's here now? They said, oh, it's mostly parking lots and a notorious strip club. And we created together Her Secret is Patience. It takes a full year for you to see all the colored permutations of lighting that I've designed. And in winter, it's warmer colors, and in summer, it's cooler colors. And every night, it's just a little different. Thank you. So nice to be here. In downtown Phoenix, I have a friend who has an office there, and one day, his attorney, the attorney for their firm, came in. She had never been interested in art, had never visited the local art museum, which is quite a good one, and she grabbed everybody, and she said, you've got to come see this. And there they were in their business suits, and she got them to lie down in the grass, fully clothed for work, and to look up at the sky. And there they were, watching the changing patterns of wind, like rediscovering the wonder of being here. It's important to me to break out of the traditional boxes of where we think art is and who can see art and who deserves to be part of that. And that's what I really care about, bringing art into life. This is downtown Seattle. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation reached out to me and they asked, could I give their mission a visual form? I mean, these guys are like, curing malaria and polio, eradicating forever, and I just didn't know what in the world to do. Their core belief was that every person on our planet deserves a chance for a healthy, productive life. And I thought, I don't know how to make a form that expresses that. And I thought, well, for me, it's waking up for one day. I can deal with thinking about one day and to see that day in full color. Like, not to be colorblind, you're still alive, but you don't see the full color. So I stuck a camera on their roof and recorded the sky, and I measured the sky's color saturation through the course of a day. So that is that shape. And then we began prototyping in the studio, and then we've been developing custom software tools to model these new ways that I'm working. And so there is the form. And, oops, auto advances. Oops, I'm going to let it, there we go. So I wanted it to just blend with the sky as the clouds are moving, the weather is changing. It becomes this transparent, translucent interaction with nature. And that's a permanent work. Thank you. If you're ever in Seattle, anyone can go and see it right there in downtown. But the idea that I had was that I wanted the color of sunrise that's happening in real time at each of their offices around the world to be projected onto the sculpture in real time. So it's literally connecting you to the fact that right now it's evening in Seattle, but the sun is rising in Beijing. There we go. And so the colors are changing, and if you pay attention, you can find out that actually this is the time that they're just waking up to begin the work in another part of the world. That's a detail. So the fibers are this PTFE fiber that is 100% UV resistant, and then the ropes are made of a fiber that is 15 times stronger than steel. So those dark white lines are that really strong fiber. So this is Boston before the Big Dig. This highway cut the city off from its waterfront. It was nicknamed the largest parking lot in the world. They came to me, and after the Big Dig, it looks like this now. This ribbon park has replaced where the highway was, and they said, could you help us with an artwork that speaks to the reconnection of our city with this park? And my thought, when I was a kid, I used to play Jacob's Ladder with a string, and so my sketch was like, well, what if we could just sew the city back to the waterfront? We shut down all the streets downtown. We brought in 7 cranes, a 100-ton crane, and we began lifting this sculpture into the sky. It's engineered to 110 miles per hour, which is the same as the requirements of the skyscrapers that it is attached to. And it's attached to these 3 high-rises, and they are all privately owned. So everybody had to work together in order for this to be brought into the city. It's like a physical proof of what we can do when we are in symbiosis. When we are working together, we can do things that seem impossible. And it's a reminder for me of that. This is a part of the city where no one ever would stop. It's kind of what somebody told me that this made them feel safer after the sculpture was there. And like no one ever had lunch there. And you can see between 3 a.m. when the cranes came in and 11 a.m. when this video ends, and people are already having lunch there lying down in the grass, which is really exciting. It's like, yeah, we can change things. So here's behind the scenes in my studio. This is this custom software that we're using, which enables me to put in the thickness, the weight, the stiffness of every piece of twine and every knot so that I can see it with gravity and understand its relationship to the city and the fact that you are always in motion. Your experience is dynamic. So my understanding as a designer has to be understanding that dynamic and changing path as you experience the work to create the right proportions in relation to the city. On the left is my render from our software, and on the other side is the real photograph, unretouched with Photoshop. Thank you. Actually, I'm clapping for the computer scientists and the computer software. They did an amazing job.